So, welcome to Black History Month, African Americans and Academics. We have meetings every Friday this month only. And to get updated on hidden history activities, please join our remind by texting 81010 at Hidden Hist and follow Instagram LHS_Hidden History Club for more updates. Thank you. Next slide. So, why do we have Black History Month? And if to answer discussion questions, feel free to just blurt it out or write it in the chat. All right. If nobody else, does anybody have any ideas? Okay. We'll move on to the next slide, Josh. Why do we have Black History Month? First of all, it's not racist to have a month dedicated to Black history, even when there isn't a White History Month. Much of White history is covered in American history courses, and even when Black history is told, only Black tragedies are taught. Black history needs to be celebrated, and we need to make sure that African Americans will get a chance to celebrate their heritage and be proud of it. And we need to learn more about systemic racism. Go on.
Okay, post-Civil War, African Americans get access to education. So Jim Crow laws and African American segregation in schools. So Jim Crow laws were state and local laws that enforced racial segregation in southern United States. And the Pleasant versus Ferguson case established racial segregation in the South. African Americans were forced to drink at separate water fountains, eat at separate restaurants, and ride at the back of buses, and along with other things. African Americans were also forced to attend separate or colored schools and were often underfunded compared to white schools. Black teachers at these schools were also paid less than white teachers. Next slide, yeah.
All right, so here we have Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, who were major influential figures at the time. Starting off with Booker T. Washington, he was an educationist, reformer, and Black leader. He urged Blacks to accept discrimination at the time being and instead focus on elevating themselves through hard work. He assumed this would win the respect of whites and lead to African Americans being fully acknowledged as citizens. He also advocated education, industrial and farming skills, and highlighted the importance of virtues such as patience and discipline. To the right, we have W.E.B. Du Bois, and he was a Black intellectual, scholar, and political thinker. He disagreed with Washington's strategy and believed it would result in white oppression. Du Bois advocated political action and argued that social change could be accomplished by creating a small group of educated Blacks, also known as the talented 10th. And a famous quote by him is, "The cost of liberty is less than the price of repression." Next slide.
Okay, so who made better points and why might people disagree with them? So go ahead and go back to the last slide, Josh, and we'll give people like a minute or two or even longer. Just type it out or on you and talk about who do you agree with and why might people disagree with Booker T. Washington or Webb Du Bois. Yeah, Florence, that's a good point. She said, you guys can check in the chat out, but she said she agrees with Du Bois more since in the long run, he was fighting against the discrimination and graduation of Black people. Yeah, I agree. And Nora Lee said, I agree with Du Bois because social change would be systematic change, not just assimilation to white culture. Yeah, and I think that's a lot of people agreed with Du Bois, because he wanted more radical change. And I also wanted to just talk quickly about Booker T. Washington. He was born a slave, so he had a different outlook on what was possible in change, while Du Bois was an intellectual and was able to go to a lot of elite schools, and so he had a more radical idea on change. So yeah. Landon said, although both made good points, I don't support Washington's idea of preserving what honor African Americans had and rising via work. I think Du Bois was much more of a modern thinker at the time and wanted complete equality rather than taking a cheaper amount of respect for the time being. Absolutely. And Yom said, I'm not sure about the small group of educated blacks, though. I agree with the Washington's education of the masses. Yeah. So, and anyone else want to say anything? Or do you guys think this is a good time to change? Ramiz, Adrian, Josh, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I think Webb Du Bois made good points. I think Booker Washington was rightfully afraid of what might happen if they did more radical protesting.
I agree.
All right, so compare and contrast. So what do you guys notice between these two depictions of schools at the time? Like just maybe some differences and just what's going on overall. And just feel free to type in the chat or unmute your mic.
I feel like that it shows how that black people are in more cramped schools, that they look more underfunded, because you can see that it looks like kids of all ages are in there. And then for the white school, you can see they all have like nice textbooks and they're not cramped, and that it looks like the kids are around the same age.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anybody else have any points of view, interpretations?
You got a lot in the chat as well.
Yeah,
it looks like.
Oh, sorry, Josh.
Go ahead, Ramiz. It's all good.
Okay, so yeah, in the chat. Oh, right here. Okay. Yeah, so Landon mentioned, oh, that's a good point. That small group sounds elitist. And Mr. Rowe mentioned that the student to teacher ratio is also present. Yo mentioned the school for Black students is overpopulated. That's true. Landon also mentioned the segregated schools have notable differences in number of students, and the Black school is obviously overcrowded. Yeah. Nora Lee mentioned that Black schools have less resources and crowded classrooms. I agree. Nicole mentioned that there's the overcrowding need furniture. Adrian mentioned the Black schools are overcrowded and did not have enough resources, whereas white schools have more resources like books and teachers. Yes, and Alex mentioned, okay, the chat. Bryant mentioned how populated each school is very noticeable. Style of clothing seems generally the same. A lot more women are in the image on the left though. And yeah, these are all very good points. Great job. And yeah, I think next slide.
Okay, Brown versus Board of Education. So this was a Supreme Court case that took place in May 17th, 1954 in Topeka, Kansas. And so it overturned the Plessy versus Ferguson court case. And for all those who weren't familiar with that, that basically established racial segregation. And so Brown argued racial segregation of public schools violates the 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment prohibits states from denying equal protection of laws to any citizen. Additionally, he argued that segregation implies that African Americans were inferior to whites. It became a landmark Supreme Court case, and it paved the way for desegregation of housing, public accommodations, and institutes for higher education.
Difference in funding, white and Black schools. Although all the schools in a given district were supposed to be equal, most Black schools were far inferior to their white counterparts, as seen in the quotes below. We're starting off with the first quote for Brown versus Board of Education. Segregation of white and colored children in public schools has a detrimental effect upon the colored children. A sense of inferiority affects the motivation of a child to learn. Another quote is, "We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal." Next slide.
So let's talk a little bit about the transition from segregation to integrated schools. So Ruby Bridges, born 1954, the same year as the Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education, she broke barriers in the educational sense when on November 1960, she was the first African American student to integrate into a Southern elementary school when she was only 6 years old. Now, the schools dragged their feet a little bit in desegregating their schools, and she really broke that barrier, allowing herself to be the first student to integrate into these schools. On her way to school, though, she was escorted by 4 U.S. Marshals through crowds screaming racial slurs and vicious verbal attacks almost every day in her first year. During her first day of school, though, she was stuck in the principal's office due to segregation as parents pulling their children out of school because they didn't agree that these African American students should be allowed into their school, which is just wrong. Now, Ruby, a little bit about her schooling is that Ruby attended class as a party of one under Barbara Henry at William Frantz Elementary School. Now, she was a party of one because Barbara Henry was the only teacher at that school which was willing to teach Ruby. So even though it was even though it was integrated, it was still semi-segregated. Now, the parents had split opinions on sending Ruby to school, especially with her father, Abon, fearing the consequences of her being sent to school. Now, he was right in that fear, with considering that her father lost the job that he was in, as well as her grandparents lost their sharecropping contracts after she was after she went to school. Now, her effects, though, she opened the gates to other African American students, and not long after, her nieces also attended the same school. And she graduated from a desegregated high school later in her life. Now, let's take a look a little bit at some of the images of this historic event. So on the left, you can see Ruby Bridges being escorted by the 4 U.S. Marshals to and from school. On the top right, you can see a different view with Ruby and her mother being escorted by the same four U.S. Marshals. And on the bottom right, we can see the giant crowd of people often verbally attacking Ruby on her way to and from school. Definitely, definitely. So what do you guys think? Should we be doing more to have schools be more inclusive? Definitely. We're bringing up a lot of good points in the chat. This is great, everybody. I definitely agree with everything that you guys are saying. Definitely, demographically, our school is predominantly white, but we definitely teach more inclusive values. So if you can keep expressing your ideas in the chat, but I think we're gonna move on to higher education for Black people.
Higher education for Black people, historically Black colleges and universities. Some misconceptions about historically Black colleges and universities are that they promote racism. Like, isn't it racist to have an all Black schools? And that they aren't necessary because we have integrated schools, or that HBCUs are only for Black students and aren't diverse. But in the following slides, we will disprove these. Next slide. HBCUs, what are they? Congress defines HBCUs as a school established before 1964 whose principal mission was and is the education of Black people. HBCUs offer the best and only education to African Americans during the post-Civil War and pre-1960s civil rights movement, because segregation prevented Black people from attending all-white colleges. It is not racist. In fact, it was created because of racism that blocked out Black people from entering white segregated schools. And there was never a formal law saying that it did not accept white people. Continue. Cheyney University of Pennsylvania. The first HBCU was the Institute for Colored Youth, which was founded on February 25th, 1837 by silversmith Richard Humphreys, a Quaker philanthropist that bequeathed $10,000 to establish a school for Black people. In 1902, the institute was relocated to George Cheyney's farm and was thus renamed the Cheyney University of Pennsylvania. More HBCUs. Spelman College, founded in 1881 as Atlanta Baptist Female Seminary by Sophia B. Packard and Harriet E. Giles, it is America's oldest private historically Black college for women. Today, it ranks number 54 on U.S. News' Best Liberal Arts Colleges list. Howard University, founded in 1867 in Washington, D.C. by and named after white General Oliver Otis Howard, the head of the Freedmen's Bureau, who was important in influencing Congress to allocate funds for Black schools. Today, it ranks number 80 on U.S. News' ranking of national universities. Famous alumni of HBCUs, Kenneth B. Clark. He was the first Black man to be president of the American Psychological Association and whose 1940s doll test experiments were used in the Brown v. Board case to argue against segregation. The doll test experiment studied the psychological effects of segregation by using 4 dolls, identical except for color, to test children's racial perceptions. Their subjects, children between the ages of 3 to 7, were asked to identify both the race of the dolls and which color doll they prefer. White and Black children assigned positive attributes to lighter-skinned dolls than darker-skinned dolls. Doll test experiment conclusions. To separate African American children from others of similar age and qualifications solely because of their race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way unlikely ever to be undone. Racism was an inherently American institution, and that school segregation inhibited the development of white children as well. Continue.
I think we got a question in the chat,
Oh.
if we want to answer it now.
Okay.
I think the reason that most HBCUs are on the East Coast was because that was where segregation was most heavily prominent. In the North as well as the West Coast, there was some segregation, but it was less strict in a sense. The Deep South was really the area where they didn't want to move forward with this and integrate schools. And that's why I believe most of these HBCUs were founded in this area, because they really had to make their own way when it came to education.
Yeah, another reason for HBCUs being on the East Coast is that these were schools made for children of people who used to be slaves, and many of them did not move out of the South. Okay, next slide. Another famous alumni is Alice Walker, a Spelman College alumni, who is a famous American writer and political activist whose books showcased African American culture and highlighted the struggles of women. Her most famous book is The Color Purple, about an abused and uneducated African American woman's struggle for empowerment. This book won her the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1983. Okay.
HBCUs, why they're important today. Today, HBCUs produce 25% of all African American graduates in STEM fields. 300,000 students attend HBCUs every year, 80% of them African American. And here are some quotes. Helped reduce student debt for low to middle income families, which could dramatically narrow the racial gap between Black and white households. And Lomax is the president of UNCF, which stands for United Negro College Fund, and it invests in the better future for students, communities, and the nation. And the second quote is, HBCUs provide a stable and nurturing environment for those most at risk of not entering or completing college, low income, and first generation college students. And here is a chart or a graph that shows the 2011 undergrad enrollment by race and ethnicity. And I was wondering if you can take a moment and type in the chat or unmute and talk about what you see in this chart. What stands out to you? What do you notice?
I think you could keep moving forward.
Okay, then we can go to the next slide.
So now let's celebrate a little bit about Black academics and some famous people. So starting off with Hallie Quinn Brown. So she established May community-based organization for Black women. And she promoted the idea that middle-class Black women really need to help the underprivileged. And within her promotion, she was very skilled in her speeches, often performing her words to fight against racial stereotypes. Now, during her lifetime, she was the president of the National Association of Colored Women, and through her time as president, she fought against many racial stereotypes. For instance, a monument which depicted a Black woman holding a white infant, which was a heavy and just wrong racial stereotype during this time. Now, another one of her main accomplishments was that she published a book called Homespun Heroines and Other Women of Distinction in 1926. Now, this describes the real lives of Black women and their hardships that they faced. Now, within this book, she collaborated with more than 25 women to have accurate and detailed experiences to portray their hardships. Now, a little bit more moving on, we have Daniel Hale Williams. Now, in 1891, he founded Provident Hospital in Chicago, which was the country's first interracial hospital. Now, this was a big achievement because it broke the barrier of segregation and began this interracial hospital. Now, Provident provided care for African American patients, as well as established the country's first African American nurses school in the United States. Now, although many scientists disagreed with him at the time, this was one of his main achievements. He performed the first open heart surgery in July 1893. Now, during the surgery, he operated without modern blood transfusion or antibiotics, which helps heal surgery patients after the surgery. And his main accomplishment is that Williams became one of the first and only African American members at the time of the American College of Surgeons in 1913. And then moving on a little bit modern, we have Nathan Hare, born in 1933. Now, a little bit about Hare was that he originally hoped to become a boxer, but after a little bit of persuasion from his teacher, he majored in sociology and earned 2 PhDs, one in sociology and another in clinical psychology. Now, in 1968, he became the coordinator of the Black Studies program at San Francisco State College, and this really opened up the studies of African Americans throughout history and earned him the title the Father of Black Studies. But throughout his career, he battled with college faculty to express his ideas, causing him to move around positions many times. For instance, in one case, he spoke out against the president of Howard University for wanting to have the student body of for wanting to have the student body be 60% white by 1970. Now, this is really significant because Howard University is historically a Black university college, and it basically went against the main function of these historically Black universities by making it a majority of white students. But even though he expressed this idea, he was fired shortly thereafter. Now, his accomplishments also include founding the Black think tank with his wife, and this mainly focused on addressing concerns and problems within the African American community. And so we thank you guys so much for attending. Make sure to attend next meeting where we will cover Black entertainers and performers throughout history and today. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and make sure to please sign in with the form, as well as give us some suggestions for future topics. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and we'll be here to answer.